Saturday Disaster is one of the Rose Art Museum's most iconic pieces. It's Andy Warhol's silkscreen of a horrific car wreck.
He had an interest in the relationship of public emotion to public spectacle to image making.
Christopher Bedford is the museum's new director, hired last year to lead the Rose out of the disaster created when, in 2009, Brandeis University attempted to close the museum and sell off its collection. 4 years later, with both the museum and school under new leadership, the Rose, he says, is back, and with Warhol at the center of its fall exhibitions. Given all that's happened recently, is it a bit of a reclamation?
I think, I'm not sure I would use the term reclamation, but it is, I think it's an exclamation point. Not only is the Rose back in full flower, but we have so much more than you imagined.
One of the area's youngest museum directors at 36, Bedford says his immediate focus has been on reassimilating the Rose for students on campus.
This is a resource for them, an unusually rich resource in art history for them.
Bedford says the Rose now also has full university backing, and he's doggedly rebuilt the museum's board and donor base.
Yes, the financial support has grown.
In many respects, the Warhol show, Image Machine, is a testament to the museum's renewed vitality. As much of 90% of the exhibition comes from the Rose's deep Warhol holdings. Machine is a metaphor, too. The Rose has managed to reinvent, just as Warhol frequently did.
Warhol was somebody who had an intuitive understanding that painting, if it was to have a life, had to move into other directions.
Photography was the basis of that work, to the point of obsessiveness. Warhol created some 100,000 photographs during his lifetime, including Polaroids, which he favored for their simplicity.
They were an origin point for a lot of his work, and that they were almost like sketches. Particularly when you look at them, you lay them all out, and you see which one of the Polaroids eventually became a bigger work, you can see his mind at work. And I think that is, for me, is what makes them so interesting to look at.
Warhol himself is a sketchbook for much of what we see today, Bedford says, including art and otherwise.
You walk past, say, Crate and Barrel, and you see a window, and the window is lined with, I don't know, 200 blue vases, which individually are completely uninteresting, but as an ensemble and as a way to market and as a total image, become extremely compelling. That investment in repetition is very Warholian, and it's been taken up as a branding method.
Which, of course, Warhol himself did, making the Image Machine a matrix of art, commerce, and culture within photography, wallpaper, and painting.
It's this kind of totalizing effect, which feels to me, it's a world. I mean, it's an Andy world. That was the desire.
And a path for what was to come.
And Jared Bowen is here. Welcome, Jared.
Thanks.
So take me back for a second here. What happened with the Rose? Why were they selling it, and then how did it end up not going through?
Well, it was the former president, in a very, very controversial move. The former president of Brandeis University decided that, to reinforce the community, the college community, he was going to sell the museum and its holdings, which is just probably the best collection of modern art that any university museum in this area has, and perhaps any museum in this area has. And it became, sort of this international incident to the point at which the entire art community around the world really rallied and prevented it. That president stepped down. There's a new president now, Christopher Bedford.
But he didn't step down over that. I mean, in fairness, hadn't they lost like half their endowment in the Madoff scheme?
Well, there were a number of issues, but they wanted to target the museum, which was, I think that they underestimated the art. We've been talking about this so much lately. What happens when you underestimate the arts community? And Christopher Bedford told me that that's part of what his base for coming in is that he has this groundswell of support that he can now tap into, because this is a moment of history that he can utilize.
So is Andy Warhol still the king of pop? I thought it was a great analogy when they made that Crate and Barrel thing with the 200 vases, and this idea that, he's invested in repetition. And it's so true. You see that everywhere now. Yeah,
I think the effects of Andy Warhol are everywhere. And what's interesting is I think that people frequently don't realize that he was a graphic artist first. And you see him in everywhere. You see, for instance, Mario Testino. And I'm thinking in terms of the recent art exhibits I've seen here in Boston. Mario Testino has made a big career now out of the party photographs. Well, Andy Warhol was doing that because he integrated himself in the New York upper echelons of society. So you see that traced to Tostino. Barry McGee, who was recently at the ICA for his graffiti art, he did the same thing. He went to art school. He has this formal educational training, just as Warhol did, and he's broken boundaries in the way he presents art. And of course, you see it in Shepard Fairey, appropriating images. Warhol was also involved in lawsuits in his time, just as Shepard Fairey was now.
And he also had that very distinctive look. All right, what do you got coming up tomorrow?
Tomorrow morning, as always, I talk with Bob C., our Morning Edition host. I'm on at 8:50, and I'll be giving a preview of what to see this weekend, including the film Gravity, starring Sandra Bullock. And I'll tell you all of the reasons that you should see this movie. I don't want to give away too much, but it's definitely a 4-star movie. And really? I'll talk about the other things that people must not miss this weekend.
All right, thanks, Sarah. All right, that is it for Greater Boston. Tomorrow night, Chris Matthews makes a living asking provocative questions. We'll turn the tables on the hardball host, who's out with a new book on D.C. politics, and his time as a top aide to Tip O'Neill. And next week, we kick off our series on concussions in conjunction with the Frontline documentary, League of Denial. 2 years ago, a soccer concussion ground Molly Caron's life to a halt.
No driving, no texting, no TV, no bright lights, no reading. So I was really restricted from daily life.
Now she's pushing to test the brains of young athletes before they're injured. That's next week on Greater Boston. I'm Emily Rooney. Thanks for watching.